Okay. It's my turn now. By real, not anymore inside. First of all, I saw the second part for the first time, so I'm trying to understand. Yeah, because it had been built during the other construction or afterwards, and then I didn't see anymore. But I know very well the first part because I was there in 1969. So it's easy to talk about both of them. But first of all, I want to not only to talk, but to show a little bit the context of this operation, because as a Fondazione Prada, we have a long story, and I'd like to introduce a little bit the story because, I think it's important to understand that this is a result of a certain way of working, a method of working that we started in 1993. Doing exhibition. The Fondazione Prada had been established to support sculpture most of the time, and this is a sculpture exhibition, as you can see, with a lot of was and it is also reconstruction. And so I will show really fast, and then I will talk about what it means to reconstruct, what it means is the logic of reconstruction, what kind of question the reconstruction means for history of art, because that was I'm trying to say in the video, is that everybody knows the history of modern art, sometime trying to reconstruct. I started in 1976 to reconstruct Mondrian Room, Duchamp Room, and so on. But contemporary art is kind of disappearing fast. It's become more and more an event. So there's a lot of question about what it means to reconstruct. Anyway, I will. This is my control. So I push what? This way? No. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Very fast. As I said, Fondazione Prada has been established by Mircea Prada and Patrizio Bertelli, and they were just in love with contemporary art, and they were not now as a big fashion company, were just lovers of sculpture. They're friends of sculpture. So in '93 they start this kind of Prada Milano Foundation center, and then they invite me to do exhibition 1995. So it's more or less 20 years next year. And the idea was to support special project, not to show, let's say, contemporary art, but to do really difficult project that artists never were able to do it. So we're going to artists, say, what is your dream? What you like to do that you never did? And we have some funding. Now it's normal to have this kind of approach, especially dealers, but at the time nobody was, supporting contemporary art and the difficult part. So we start to, to do a big haul of Anish Kapoor. So the idea was, as I said, do impossible project. So the impossible project, or the dream project, was our method. And every artist we were approaching, this has to be, in order to do this piece, you have to reinforce the floor. No museum will accept. At the time I was starting to work I was already curator of the Guggenheim, and I started the Guggenheim in 1989. You cannot go to the Guggenheim and say, okay, let's do a hall in your museum. That's not so easy. And so we have to reinforce the floor. So you start to do this kind of impossible. Anish was not yet well known, like it is now. So the idea was to do whatever was difficult to do. Also, big piece by Louise Bourgeois, or this kind of dream temple by Mariko Mori. Again, she was doing drawings, she was doing kind of small object, and she said, I want to do a kind of Japanese temple because it's my culture. So we decide and we support this kind of approach to contemporary art. So the impossibility is more or less more and more where we are trying to achieve this Marquin, and we did also this piece by Castaneller. So really the idea of the foundation was to find a way to collect, because naturally people being a curator, has also have to build collection, and a good curator is a good vampire. You know, and you get to the artists, and if the piece is big, they don't know where to put it. So more normally you get also donation, or you know, you get a collection. So we have a big collection. Every show that we did at the Prada Foundation belongs to us for this reason. You know, we collaborate, we create something very special, unique. This mushroom turns also, you know, the machine. So they are very complex, and we did a lot of this kind of project. Then we expand the space from the small one. You can see here is still a kind of small space in an upside down room, and we went to a bigger space because more and more in the 90s there was a request to enlarge the possibility to do spaces, and so we did the kind of first early graffiti from California, the Barry McGee, with bringing trucks, construction, or this huge piece by Andreas Luminski. So, as I said, the idea was always to go to the artist and say, you know, what is the dream of your life? To do a film. We collaborate with Queen to, you know, Steve McQueen to an early piece. We worked with him, and we tried to get involved with the first film, Hunger, you know, that he was doing in England. So we support special projects, we support film as a fondazione. There was never a connection between the product or the industry and the fondazione. The fondazione was totally free to do special projects. We did a big whale by Tom Sachs. So more and more, the idea is to realize something that was never done. And then you understand why, you know, also the exhibition, the reconstruction of the exhibition 1969 is part of this strategy. And 3 years ago, because we want to be also at the Biennale, in occasion of the Biennale of Venice, the Prada Foundation got this building. First we were showing at the Cini Foundation, all the other institutions, but then the city of Venice proposed to us, to the foundation, to acquire this building. And we acquired, we restore as it was, without no change of the structure, without no plaster, really a precise installation, restoration, and it's 4 floors. What you will see, the first floor, the mezzanine, you have seen already in the film. The second and the piano nobile are the 3 major space, but we have 3 more to go, and we will start to use this year the 2nd floor and the roof. So this is the first ground floor, and what you have seen already, that's the entrance, and that's the building it was. There were a building that belongs to 2 brothers, and they hate each other, so they have 2 stairs, so they cannot see each other. So you have right or left, so they never met. And one was very rich, and one was very stingy. The one who was very rich had a fresco, the one who was very stingy got only white wall. And as you can see the separation, you know, there's on the left or the right, there are 2 kind of apartment and building. And these are the, you know, we clean up, these were the storage, this is the entrance. So we did a huge effort of the restoration in order to keep the building and not to alter it as, let's say, a Palazzo Grassi or the building that were in Venice. Is the courtyard, you have seen already in the film, and you go up, and this is the biggest inside square of Venice. And that's what we start to do shows. And this is actually the rich brother. The painting are not so great, but, and these are the, you know, the articulation. So the first show we did was to show part of the collection. So we start to use this building again with the documenting the possible project of the Foundation Prada. And this was kind of first opening in order to show the collection, but also the building how it was. And you can see that it's been destroyed, you know, doing 2 different kind of floors. Before there was the archive of the Biennale, and they were totally was taken apart because they created small rooms for office and so on. So it's kind of a little bit destroyed building when we got it, and the window were destroyed, you know, everything. So we clean up, we brought back, and we show special project. And this is the second show we did. It's about multiples. It's called The Small Utopia, which is the history of the 100 years of multiples. And the idea naturally is not to have only one multiple, but to show, let's say, Duchamp, the Pissoir, there are 7 exist. So we have 2, the extended arm and so on. So the idea was to show really the multiple in a way that you can see the proposition of quantities, not only the selection of multiples. And you can see, 100, let's say 12, I think 20 Liechtenstein, you can see Rauschenberg, Hamilton, and so on and so on. So the idea is to explain to the people this idea of multiplication, to democratize the art system. Never went through. At the end, that's what we call the small utopia. And that's how we start to think, as I said in the interview, what was never done. Talking with Mircea Prada, we say, the reconstruction has been done in the multiples. The multiples are copies of an existing things. The rooms in the history of museum have been reconstructed. The Schwitter's room is in Hanover. The Litzitsky is in Germany. I did an history of environment in 1976 at the Biennale. The Mondrian room has been done, and Ray room. So the idea of recreating a space, of 4 or of 6 walls, let's say, 4 walls, ceiling, and floor has been part of the history of art. And the history of art has been documenting most of this kind of event, but never reconstruct certain events. So what's never been done, and we start to discuss what's never done, was the exhibition of certain artists or certain exhibition. If you took the Malevich 010, which is a very famous picture of 30 or 40 or 50 Malevich in one room, there would be an incredible event. Nobody can do it. First of all, because you have 50 Malevich in one room, the people will queue for hours and they, will destroy the room and so on. So the idea of reconstructing become part of our thought as an impossibility. And talking with Mircea, I said, what is the most difficult show to be done, or to be redone, to be restaged? And I thought about the show that I was involved with, or not as a curator, but as a person and be involved with the period. And we discussed about the Harald Szeeman show that was When Art to Become Form. And so we start to dig in all the possible material that was existing. And we went through all the archives all over the world and discovering a lot of pictures, about 1,000. And the Getty Museum, a few, there's the archive of Bern. So we went through in order to redo point by point the exhibition was done by Harry. And naturally, where to do this exhibition? There are 3 possibilities. One, you do the show in the existing space of the Ca' Cornere in Venice, which will be another contemporary show, with material that is precious but is not a reconstruction. You assemble works of art that were there at the time, and any museum can do it. The second part was to create a space like an hangar and to build the Bern space, if not the Bern building, which is not so easy, in an empty industrial building. And the third part was to include and to force part of the space of the Bern institution in the 18th century building. And that started to be the idea that we developed with the RAFF Koolhaas and say, okay, how we do something that is historical but contemporary at the same time. To do historical, naturally, is the reconstruction. But to do contemporary, you do contemporary because you are using this building of Venice, and which is the one that you visit at a time. So we did this kind of hybrid insert that makes, you know, this kind of combination so strong that you have seen in the film. So we start to study naturally material, all the documents, you know, Joseph Beuys, Wicker, Kitsonier, famous Lawrence Wiener, Alighiero Boetti. So I went through 1,000 pictures, and it's me with my, you know, medaille, which is being, you know, the future. And we try to insert, as you can see, in the plan of the Carconnet della Regina, the real space of Bern. And you can see that was a very small show. I remember when I was there at the time, it was a huge show for my memory, and also because the pictures that I remember part of my vision and I saw were really showing a huge space. We discovered that all the photographers use wide angles. So in order to enlarge the vision of the space. So the space you can see is very small. And this part we didn't use, and only one floor was used. And these are exactly how the black dots are the space, the stairs of the Carconnet, while the white is exactly the location of every piece that we try to collect. And naturally to insert, and you can see the relationship between the contemporary wall, the modern wall of Bern, and the space of the old building. And we did in a way that was kind of integration between the two. Huge amount of work, and that's what Thomas Demand was very precious, because he said, you know, every detail has to be so precise. You feel it that one space has been cut by history. So modern is cutting, or contemporary is going through history and become contemporary again. And so, and these were the original pictures. So we tried to naturally insert these elements, and we did a huge research about where every piece was in the collection, was available. We went to the artists to ask for reconstruction done by themselves. And so that was our result. Trying to combine the historical part with the contemporary, with Bern. And now you can see that's the early pictures with Boetti himself, and this is exactly the location in Venice. So, but with the feeling that you are in another space. That was very important for us, because otherwise become a kind of abstract reconstruction. So you feel that's the idea to be in an old building, you are in Venice at the end, and but this is a quotation, an hybrid quotation of the historical show. And this means a lot, you know, for future reconstruction, and this is Mario Merz in the space of Bern, and Mario Merz in the space of Venice. So there's always this situation of creating this kind of tension between a reconstruction of the past, but insert in the present. And I think that's is the question raised by the show, how you do a reconstruction that is not a limbo. Limbo means you bring the exhibition in a kind of abstract space, like a storage, and you do out of the time. So we want the audience to be anchored where they were, which is naturally Venice. but at the same time to experience what was there at the time. That was Joseph doing the fat piece, and we were lucky to get actually the permission by few artists or estate to redo the piece. And when there was no possibility to bring the original piece or to reconstruct, we invent this kind of sign with a chalk that makes the kind of phantom with a picture nearby. Okay, so in a certain way, this exhibition raised for me, as an art historian, was a lot of question about information, about how you inform the new audience about some history that had been passed, how you reconstruct routes that had been destroyed, how you document, like Ari was talking, happening, fluxus. Now, naturally, as you know, Marina Brown is reconstructing performance, is doing an institute for redoing or keeping the memory of performance. So there's all this kind of ephemeral event that are part of the language of history, like doing exhibition, museum exhibition, I don't know, the European iceberg. I don't have any pictures, and it was for me an important moment, not only for myself, but also for the way of doing exhibition. They were inclusive of different language. The show was about architecture, design, art, so different kind of language that were assembled together, not as a separate entity, but as a combination, as trying to make a kind of jam session of different language that create the image of culture. So to do culture exhibition, not only art exhibition, to do language exhibition, not only art or design or architecture exhibition. So in a certain way, this kind of event disappear, or they only remain in history as documents, as photography, or as something that, if you're lucky, after the 80s, film or video. But there is never, for the new generation, the experience of the space. How you go and see a space that has been built by an artist. So this means that a lot of history, mostly, if you are an art historian, you know that the history of art, also from the antique time, is being done through the palace, not through the street. The street disappears. The ephemeral part of history disappears. Only what is left is the power of the history, the history of power, let's say, the history of the king, the history of the prince, the history of all the power of the bourgeois, and so on. But the other part of history doesn't exist. So how we integrate, how we redo it, how we represent this kind of ephemeral part of history, how we represent relationship. In a show or any kind of exhibition, there are relations between objects. Every relation is lost. You only have the product, which is typical of the market, isolated, and you put in a private house or in a private collection or a private museum. The relationship between artworks are gone. And there are relationships that are very important. Think about, the Armory show. Think about the Impressionist show. Think about the installation of Malevich, the Russian, or a futurist. All this kind of exhibition, the Dada exhibition. The Dada exhibition were in 2 rooms, and there were 100 pieces, which means they create relationship between the object, and the relationship were important for the artist. These are gone. You have only one Duchamp piece alone, or Mel Ray, or anything. So what I'm trying to say, this kind of exhibition was based on relationship, was based on artists arriving, I was there with all of them, arriving and finding a space, finding an empty space that they can park their work. There were so many, and the room was so small, but somebody who arrived at the last minute, let's say, very famous is Barry Flanagan. He was always sloppy and very nice guy and so on. So he arrived last minute, and he didn't have space anymore with this kind of avalanche of artists destroying the floor or doing the wire. And he was so smart. He took a rope, and you've seen the rope, and he crossed 4 rooms. So he took 4 rooms instead of 1. Because the rope was very flexible, no? So in a certain way, with this kind of situation that was so flexible, and this kind of relation, mostly in every show that is done or were done, they're gone. So the history of relationship, the history of installation, the history of how these kind of things happen are not part of our way of education or way how they happen. So that's, as an art historian, interests me a lot, because you have to understand that there is this kind of communication between the art done by the curator. When Philip is doing the show, I'm doing the show, we select, this guy goes with this. There are kind of not secret but kind of direct way of understanding why one art is near the other one. That's why the artists, they want to have their single room, so they want to be alone. Because the curator or this kind of situation, they have to live together with somebody else, but they hate him or they hate her. There's a lot of struggling going on and the competition. So this kind of communication in the show, in relationship with the installation, in relation with the artist, is gone. And it would be nice to not reconstruct, but to consider now that this part of history and this part of a way of considering display as a language. Display is a language. We know about fashion, we know about the mall, we know about exhibition, we know about all these kind of things, that the communication of object is not only based on the single object, but on the relationship between the object and where they are located, what kind of installation, what kind of architects. That's why more and more people are working with architect, with the graphic designer to do a show. I started in 1976 and I learned a lot about working in team. An architect doesn't care what you put at the end of the corridor. They want something at the end of the corridor, so you walk to see it. That's the only way they do it. So they don't care if whatever is the object. So there is some elements that they are part of the architecture. They're part of the communication. So communication became part of the history of art and so on. So that's why I think the reconstruction raised a lot of issue about how we learn about history, how we learn about what has been done as a history of exhibition. The exhibition is a language, as to do a book. How do you do a book is a language of doing the books. And so more and more the history of exhibition, the history of curators, the history of graphic designer, the history of installation start to be part of this kind of research that is our territory. But it's still theoretical. So the problem in doing the show was not to be theoretical, but to have the experience of the show directly with the knowledge that was a kind of phantom, as has been said, or was a kind of space trip in history and in time. And now what we are doing as a Fondazione Prada is naturally to construct a machine, which is a museum, that will create this kind of more and more, this impossible project. This is kind of 70,000 square meters, and it will be a compound like a dia. You can see the old building with the insert of 2 buildings by Koolhaas. So again, we work with architect. The one with the kind of silver and the white, while the other one are all historical building, 1930, 1940. Also the gold one is a very old building. And that would be the construction of a space, an exhibition area for natural shows with climate control as a normal museum, and this will be the inside area, and this will be the tower with the collection. And you can see naturally the upside down mushroom, and a lot of historical piece that we did. And naturally, in order to reverse and to do an impossible project, being a contemporary art institution, we do a show about Roman sculpture as a first opening show, about the idea that what you see as a sculpture in the Roman time is a copy, which means it's a multiple. You don't see never the original of the Discobolus, or you don't see never the original of the Venus. So in a certain way, again, we'll have an approach of the contemporary view to the old history, and from, let's say the 4th century before Christ on. Thank you.
If anyone would like to ask anything, just wait for a microphone which will come to you. Raise your hand and you'll receive a microphone. Okay? Sorry, we just need to wait.
Will be in Milan. In Milan, it's an old factory, not so far, 500 meters from the Duomo. It's a kind of area that Prada bought for storage, and then they decide, that this is a compound. They were kind of doing the packaging of liquor at the beginning of the century, and there was a train inside, there were all the trucks coming and so on. So they bought it, and then they decided to do the institution, and 3 buildings were not so great, so we turned it down, and we construct the exhibition area with a kind of silver or aluminum building, with all the climate control situation, and the tower, which will be the collection. But all other the building will be collection too, and we do contemporary. We do library. It will be I think the first contemporary art museum in Milan.
I love the idea of being able to go see the Salon de Refusé or the Armory show, where context would really add a dimension to those shows and make history very vivid. I'm wondering, in terms of Lawrence Wiener's observations about his "this could be anywhere" piece.
Yes.
How much of a consensus was there among the other artists that was also true, and how do you juggle that attitude and the idea of fixing it in amber, so to speak?
You have to consider the time. At the time where there was no attention to this kind of work, so there were a bunch of desperate people. They had no attention, so we were kind of brotherhood. We're just traveling together, stay together. Got in the truck and go to Düsseldorf to do an exhibition and bring in the work, which was not work or material. Some of the work had been stopped at the custom in Switzerland because were object that they thought, why you don't buy in Switzerland this kind of object? You cannot import. In fact, when I said during the phrase that we enrich the show of Harald Szeeman, because we discovered that Harry invites certain artists, but their work has been stopped at the custom because we're products, So the living together and finding this we were all friends, so there was no competition, and there was also a generation coming from America. I remember, when they arrived, and there was no connection. It was a kind of supporting each other. I remember Bruce Nauman not having a show, or Sol LeWitt, or Michael Eisner not having shows in America. Impossible to have a show, and to have a show in Turin. That when Harald Szeeman said everything started in 1966 in Turin, because we were there as a group. I was a theoretician, not an artist, but we were very open to have a dialogue with this impossible things to be done, or finding material in the street, finding possibility to create something that you can buy in the shop nearby. So it was kind of situationist moment where everybody trying to find their territory. So it was not difficult for our. In fact, you can see everybody used everywhere the stairs. So if you Lawrence, Jacquet, again the stairs with the wire. So everybody was trying to find the space for the work. Naturally, there were more powerful people like Richard Serra, that has been like that all his life. So you arrive and boom, you put the lead piece, and then you did, this. But that's kind of respect. Somebody needs more space. Somebody is using the corner of a wall. Lawrence did, this piece in the corner, or Schwager. Schwager was known for painting, arrived with the blips. So everything was kind of more elastic, fluid. And the idea, exactly, that was the theory, not to have something rigid that needs space like a painting. It's not against painting. Everybody thought it was against painting. It was just more flexibility, like having plastic. You adapt. I remember 1989, just to think about the mentality of the time. 89, I did a show. I invited Mario Merz to do the show at the Guggenheim. It was the first show I was doing as a curator. And Mario, first Italian, I did the show. And as you know, the Guggenheim is the space is very low. There is this kind of ramp and so on. And Mario has done piece of 3 meters, 4 meter canvas. And I said, Mario, how we can fit all this material? How we can fit the canvas? It just doesn't fit, doesn't go in. And he said, fold it. So he did a painting like that. So that's what and a fantastic idea. Just as a curator, you don't hold a painting, no? And he said, no, just do it. So he adapt the canvas, whatever was. There was no frame, naturally. There was no rigidity. So this kind of, or Daniel Buren, Daniel was there too. And so everybody was trying to adapt to the condition offered by the institution, or the space, or the situation, or the friendship, or the aid, and so on. So it was more organic.
Congratulations, Germano. It's a monumental project, not only in conflating these two monuments, also putting them into two architectural models, putting them into crisis and dialogue, but also creating a monument of an archive in the past and bringing together these dispersed archives that are around the world, and also creating this monument of a publication, which becomes a tool for conceptualizing these practices of reconsidering historical recreations. You mentioned performance, reenactments, and part of the status of reenactments is that they're trying to reenact an event, or they have an event status to them in retrospectively bringing back the force of the past. And in a way that should exist in these recreations of exhibitions, that they have to have an event status, so they're not just something neutral that is transported from the past into the present. So I'm interested in this relationship between, in your case, in your project, between neutrality, or the possibility of neutrality, because obviously that's what you think, and theatricality. Because when you talk about, in the publication, the reconstructing of the exhibition as a restaging. So there's this whole theatrical language that's involved. So finally, my question is, I'm interested in this necessary relation of invention in something that is presumed to be a neutral recreation. So on one hand, invention, this project as an invention, rather than neutral recreation. And on the other hand, autobiography. So not a biography of Szeeman, but an autobiography of Germano Celant. So the two, invention and autobiography, come together. So it's sort of a comment and a question at the same time.
Yeah, you're right. You know, there's a scenographic aspect in the show. It's inevitable. As I said, I was talking with Herzog de Meron yesterday night about that it would be more effective, they said, if the wall were not so kind of light, but more physical, which is, you know, could help to be less as a stage set. Naturally, you know, you insert a building. You know, we redid also the window of the Bern. We did the door. You know, we reconstruct really in detail the floor. That floor naturally was kind of only the pattern. But there is an inevitable, if you bring back a moment of history from 70, 40, or, you know, beginning of the century, till today, it's impossible to reconstruct, first, the space as it was. Second, the context of perception is totally changed, you know, and the Impressionist show was totally different, you know, from if you bring it today. Also, if you are the Guggenheim, also if you are the Pompidou, whatever, just the climate around it, the way of dressing and so on. So there is a kind of restaging element that is inevitable, and you have to accept. It's a trip of memory. It's a trip in time, and it's a little bit kind of film, three-dimensional film, which I like better than a bidimensional film in this case. You know, you enter in the film, which is a kind of Woody Allen thing, but it is. You know, you enter in a film that was done at the time, physically. Nature with the knowledge, and now it's Godard, that you are in a negative space in time, which is the building of the Ca' Cornere in Venice. So you are alarmed about that you are not in 1969, the mentality is not 1969, you are in Venice, and so on. So we tried with Rem, with Thomas, and with Mircea Prada, which, you know, she's part of a team all the time. She doesn't want to sign, but she's, you know, being fashion. She knows what it means reconstructing, what it means to go back to the 30, to the 40, to do a dress. So it's a very important point to, you know, of the discussion sometimes. So the restaging, that's inevitable. Biography, yeah, sure. I select the piece because I was there. Not only. For me, it was easy to call everybody still alive and say, do you want to redo it? And everybody say yes. So they trust. There's a trust game in this kind of art, because based on respect of location, respect of material, it's not taking a painting which is defending itself. You know, the painting, you can do whatever you want, but it's an entity. Here, everything is based on relationship. If you treat somewhere and so on and so on. So I find people that disappear, they become guru. You know, there's a lot of stories. Somebody speak with dead people. You know, so there's, you know, it's an incredible trip. You know, going back in history. You know, because there are people. Or you have to go to the desert to talk with Michael Eisner, which doesn't want to do anything. In fact, the piece you have seen, the big, all in the garden, is not a piece. Was destroyed, and what you see, in fact, is covering the piece. So he never accept the piece that was done with Ari. So he said, I was not in the show. The only piece was in the show is another piece, and then you have to bring the Church of Bern to Venice, which is kind of impossible for a land artist, you know. So there's all this kind of reality that you deal with. Or Walter de Maria, that he gave us the phone, and he said, I never call. You know, the piece is the phone, and say, when the phone rings, on the other side will be Walter de Maria speaking to you. But he never called Bern. So I say, Walter, what we can do? I say, oh, no, this time I will call. And he did. And he spoke with me. You know, there's so many personal things. You know, then was supposed to call me, and you know, unfortunately died. So and then we have to take the piece off, because naturally, after he passed away, the piece was not it was not possible anymore, because you read when there is when the rings start, you know, on the other side is Walter de Maria, but Walter was dead. So we have to take a picture and to replace. So there's kind of life element in this kind of show that I like very much, and that's biography too. It's my part of living with the artist and changing and moving. So you know, when I was here in Canada with General Idea, there was always this participation that is part of my identity at the end. So there is a biography, and that's why. But it's a combination, and more, perhaps you've seen my recent book about artists, I mix biography and work together. I don't put biography at the end. You know, the spine of the book is biography, which is life, lovers, and you know, whatever, marriage, and the works. And you understand really when somebody like Louise Nevelson, the first painting of Louise Nevelson was a tree, a real painting of a tree, because she used wood. Then I did a book on John Wesley. You know, he's doing this naked, always naked body, blah, blah. He had 5 wives. So it's always obsessed with body and naked female figure. So all these kind of things I think is important today. And I think the objective of history really doesn't exist for me anymore. It's totally subjective.
Hello. Over here.
Okay.
Thank you, and this is fascinating. I suppose what I'm wondering is how, after the canon positions this work, which, as the artists insist in that first film, were really objects communicating attitudes or ideas, the canon positions them and arguably form trumps attitude, and they become sort of sacrosanct, or they no longer communicate that flexibility or that looseness. How do you avoid that happening and maintain the communicative possibilities of those ideas through these works all this time later?
I know it's very difficult, because at the time was more, as you said, a situation of intensity and relationship between object, material, found object. So as an art historian, I want to present what was there, and it's up to you to compare, because I'm always sometimes I did the context. You know, I show the artist. Let's say I did a Piero Manzoni show in New York. I show the artist, but also I show other artwork by other artists in order to understand the contrast. Let's say Manzoni, I show with Klein, I show Fortier, I show. So in a certain way, that would be the best way to create a context of this show, which, if you think, was minimal and pop art. And minimal was very rigid, and pop art was very rigid. So if you create a context, it's up to you to inform the audience. That would be the best way to enrich the communication that you're talking about. Because if you had another building, or if you had the possibility, which is not so easy, to create a context of the time. The context was also 1968, was also drugs, was also all this situation that Ari was talking, you know, the hippie and all this kind of breaking through the rigidity of a certain culture. So as a didactic element, would be nice to include all this information in real. And I'm doing sometime when I have a single artist, because that's easy then to do with a group show, to contextualize, because I'm continue to do. I'm doing now in June and show about 1953-63 about one artist, Ortella, and I'm contextualize and try to show not only the artist that I'm showing, but also the other artists and the other political event, because that's drugs was part of the moment, was influence of the California, the Oriental part. That's what Ari was talking about in the first part of the movie. So in a certain way, in order to be really didactic and to bring this kind of energy and enlarging, let's say, the idea of art, you have to show perhaps what was happening at the time. It was informal action painting in the 50s, this is 64, 65, minimal and pop. If you do a frame of that, you understand what it means. You understand that the other part for us was rigid. The other part was metal, while all these things are kind of flexible, are soft, are styrofoam, and then you understand naturally Louis Bourgeois, you understand all the context. But it's very difficult if you are not informed to enter in this show and say, what is this mess? There are people that are collectors and they were shocked because they say, we don't understand. We know everything, but we don't understand what are you doing, why you're doing, why this kind of work. Is so confusing to me. I don't see the piece because, as I said, the relation was important. The Rope and Boetti and Mario Merz all together in the same space. People are used now to the white box or to the white wall, and then there's a painting. That's always the limbo. The limbo is for the market. There's no. Have you noticed that any gallery there's never a date, whatever they show. They don't want to give you history. They don't want to give, they want the product to talk for you, to you. So, in fact, when I did a show of reconstruction of Piero Manzoni at the Gagosian Gallery, I said, I want caption. I said, what? Caption? Location, dates, technique is wrong. Because the market is used to communicate the beauty of the product. And you buy or don't buy. But if you start to have history, you have to think why. Or it's well known. Liechtenstein doesn't need because it's already a logo. But new stuff or story. If you do an historical show about Canadian art in New York, and you have to start from the 50s, you have to start make a relationship. What's happened in New York, in Europe, and Canada. You have to do this. They don't. The market doesn't want. A museum has to do it. But that's why I think, in order to understand better, think about the frame of this show. And the frame of the show was pop art and all this beautiful painting, minimal art, and that's the kind of frame that these people were not fighting against, but trying to get out of them.
I'm wondering, just in relation to the context.
The mic.
In context with the exhibition and simultaneity, if you could talk a little bit about arte povera since you're here, sir, it would be a shame not to hear some of your thoughts on this collision.
Normally, I try to avoid to be Mr. Arte povera, like, when No, I'm trying, it's a joke, because, when I went to the States, that's kind of, everybody wants a logo. Mm? And at the time, was being Italian was Mr. Spaghetti. So I always avoid it. Anyway, the arte povera is inside everybody. It's the same attitude. You are a kind of nomadic elements. The work is nomadic. It can adapt. It can be adapt to any situation. And that's what's the idea of arte povera or this kind of art. That's why I was talking before, that you find your own space. You are a gypsy, you know, you arrive with your bag and you deposit somewhere and you eat and the work leaves. And today it doesn't work like, look, think about Richard Serra, you know, did a piece like that now will be impossible to install in any place for danger. You know, the wire, you know, there was animals at the time. There was people using gas fire. Think about it, impossible. In a museum, you will not allow, and you can see the construction of the museum of any institution is based on the hours when they are open. You cannot have 24-hour piece. There are 24-hour pieces. There are pieces that are more than 24 hours. You know, there are months, but you cannot perceive them during the night. No museum is open during the night. You cannot have fire in a museum. And there's a lot of pieces with, you know, electricity, fire, you know, some repression that you discover when you cannot see, you know, a piece with water. If they link somewhere, you know, there's them. You cannot use smoke. Think about how many limitations the museum or the history of art has. And the relation with living element. You cannot bring in animals. First the animal people, they was, you know, say no, but not only that. You cannot bring a bird, or a monkey, or anything. Think, you know, there's a lot. The relation between art and life is a big issue. And the museum is really very traditional center. Don't talk about sex, don't talk about anything. So think about how the machine, that's what our mentality, you know, you come from a moment of, you know, of opening up against your parents, against for drugs, you know, think about living theater, you know, it was so much around, you know, against the war, blah, blah, blah. Any limitation will be impossible at the time. That's, you fight against. So this was the idea. You bring electricity in the museum, you bring danger. You know, Walter de Maria was doing the bed of spikes, you have to sign that you are responsible of your action, and if you go on the piece, you can die. That, you know, all these implications that are part of your life or my life, or dead people. You cannot bring a dead person in a museum. Why? It's life, no? Why the museum has to be so restrict? That's a question. I'm not saying that you have to do it, but there's so much restriction. So it's considered possibly art is an open space, freedom. No way. Think about when Jeff Koons started to show Cicciolina and, you know, his love encounters. Cannot talk about. So it's a lot. That's the question that this kind of art or this kind of generation start to discuss, and you cannot bring politics till today. So how many subjects are really outside of the museum? And what is interesting today that you can see the new art is more connected with the global culture than with our culture. Because they have war, they have blood, they have, you know, and they bring in it. And that's why they are more radical than us. That's clear. That's why, you know, the certain moment from the 90s till today, the female vision was the most radical. You know, there was so many news to be brought in the art history. You know, the female vision. You know, all these kind of things. You know, not only Louise Bourgeois, but, you know, menstruation, whatever you want to talk about. But they're still avoiding the problem of censorship in the East and, you know, war. Think about an Iranian artist who is doing orgy painting will be in jail and killed. So it's more radical for, you know, whatever you do here, because there is no risk of life. So risk of life is an interesting point. Who are the good artists who risk their life and not for the Ferrari?